Dr. Rachel Holt, originating from the UK, her graduate studies and research in British Columbia created her passion for the BC landscape and its incredible biodiversity. Rachel is trained in the science of conservation biology and land management, and accomplished in the art of applying science in the land and resource management context. Rachel has recently been vice chair of BC's independent watchdog on forest practices, the BC Forest Practices Board, as well as the board of the Columbia Mountains Institute of Applied Ecology. Rachel volunteers on the Conservation Committee for the West Kootenay Eco Society. Let's all give Rachel a great big hand. Once Rachel and I are done having our formal interview here, there's going to be time for you guys to ask questions. Thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome.
So, first of all, when it comes to forests in BC, what's something that people would be surprised to hear and should definitely know about?
Hi, thanks for having me and thanks for coming along this morning. I did put some slides with some of my answers to these questions. This is not entirely off the cuff. I'm always dangerous off the cuff. So I do have some slides for some of these just to show you some things. So I'll start with that in terms of the answer. Now, British Columbia is 50% not forested. And then the rest of the forest in British Columbia is this incredible array of forest types. We are the most diverse place pretty much in North America. We're also the place with the most left in North America, even though there were grizzly bears in California in 1908, and those populations, everything has gone refuge back into British Columbia. We have something left here that's worth saving. It's why I didn't go back when I was supposed to after I finished my PhD. And you know, this primary forest is the thing that people don't realize. I was at a conference with a bunch of bankers 2 weeks ago, and they didn't know what primary forest was. They didn't understand the notion of primary forest. We have this incredible array of primary forest, and so that's really important. And the thing that goes with that people do not understand is that when we log that forest, the amount of carbon that gets emitted is off the scale huge. So forestry in British Columbia is the largest contributor for a single industry of carbon emissions in the province. And when you add wildfires, those two things together emit more carbon than anything else. This is BC government data. And the forest and the wildfire parts do not count in the global carbon accounting system.
What?
Yes. So there you go. We'll get to it probably somewhere in there.
Yeah.
But that's something you need to know and understand, because although I knew, I didn't understand 10 years ago. And people do not understand the role of forests and carbon and how this contributes to climate change.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we're going to shift gears a little bit, and some of you guys might already know this, but maybe this is new information to you too. So multinational corporations are leaving BC, forestry corporations. Why are they leaving?
So, rapid history lesson. Back then, we were all here doing this, right? The war in the woods, remember that? We knew then that no trees was a bad thing. And it was because of this. Forest practices looked like this in the early 90s. And what came out of that is an NDP government in 1995 came up with the Forest Practices Code, and they said, we're going to have biodiversity guidebook, we're going to save parts of the forest, and we're going to do it better. That's what they said in 1995. I pretty much started working on these things about then. And what happened, so parks were enacted, and this thing was put in place that was supposed to help biodiversity. And what happened from then is that, of course, there was lobbying by industry. And there was a government change in that moment. And in 2001, they scrapped those rules. They changed to professional reliance. And they set in place these timber supply caps that stopped the impact of the biodiversity rules from impacting timber supply. And they gave biodiversity 5.1% of the productive forest. They said you can have a timber supply cap of 5.1%. That's all you can have. That's the number of trees that you can have contributing to maintaining biodiversity. You can have all the rocks and ice that you want. In fact, they gave us those. That's what the parks are. 45% of the distributed parks are rocks and ice, and less than 3% are low elevation forest types. So they skewed everything and started the game of this. This is what we have. This is what the landscape looks like. This is not, I didn't have to try hard to take this picture. You just have to look outside. It's absolutely everywhere. And during all of that, we harvested the forest. We maintained forest harvesting at 70 to 90 million cubic meters for 5 decades, while bringing in all the parks, while doing biodiversity management, while doing all of this stuff. I'm getting to the answer, really am, really am. In 2020, we changed governments again, just a little bit before that. So that was what happened under the Liberals. All of that happened during that time period. In 2020, the NDP's back in, they put out a review, they get these 2 forestry guys to write a report on the state of the forests and what should be done. And they said, oh my God, we screwed up. That's what they said, pretty much.
Name of the guys?
Yeah, Gary Merkel and Al Gawley. And they said, we haven't included First Nations. One of them is a First Nations fellow. And that was recommendation number 1. And recommendation number 2 was we need to view the forest really differently. We need to think about, instead of this is a thing to get timber from, this is a thing to get all these values, all this ecosystem health from. And they said this, and the government that we currently have in play agreed. And they said, okay, let's do it. So that started to scare the companies right there. That is partly why they went away. And so that paradigm shift, what is that? It's how to see the forest. Viewing the forest through the lens, and I always say, we didn't need a paradigm shift because most of us already saw those things in the forest. But the companies needed a paradigm shift, the forests needed a paradigm shift. The other thing that happened was that DRIPR, the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People Act, was brought in by the NDP, and to move forward UNDRIP and put nations centered in decision making. So those 2 things happened. And so this, we used to log those, and now we log the little trees in the back. That's my dog in there. And they don't want to log the little trees. So this is another reason why they're going. They logged all the big trees, and now they have to log the little trees, and there isn't so much money or value in those. So all of these things are coming together. It's called the fall down. There's no trees left. There's literally no volume left. And now we have landscapes that look like this. So we have neither ecosystem health nor value. I really am answering it. And so here, we logged for 5 decades at more than 70 million cubic meters. And now, in the last 5 years, it has crashed. We have run out of wood. We're down at 40 million cubic meters from 70 just less than a decade ago. And in the next 5 years, it's projected to go down to 35 million cubic meters. So that is all those mill closures. But this was absolutely predictable. We knew this was coming. We did not plan for it. And now they're going, oh, there's no trees. We have to go somewhere else now. Sorry, bye. That's why they're leaving.
Excellent summary. So in our Forest Act proposal, which is on our website on boundaryforest.org under our reports, I believe it's in the backgrounder document. I've got a copy of a graph that was produced by David Broadland, who does excellent analysis. And the graph shows that declining harvesting levels over the past few years. So industry sees what's happening, and they are shutting down BC mills. 3 mills around Prince George, Canfor just shut down recently, and they're investing in mills in Arkansas, Louisiana, Georgia, and they're closing the mills here and heading down there because what are the rotations like down there compared years-wise, decades-wise compared to up here?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's a totally different system. We're basically spending the capital that is generated over thousands of years in BC to build the primary forest that we have. You know, it literally is on the stand 1,000 plus, 2,000 plus, 3,000 plus years. Forests on the coast have not been disturbed since the last ice age. So that is capital that is built through that time period in carbon, in biodiversity, all those values. Right? And in our forests, there's much more rapid natural disturbances, and so that has generated capital over hundreds of years instead of thousands of years, except for in the wet belt in just north of here, where it, again, is thousands of years. So those forests, well, they never will come back. Even if we wait forever, they're not coming back, but we don't plan to. Our rotation age here in the interior is around 100 years. In the south, it's around 20 years. And, you know, so there, it's completely different. Like the model of forestry is completely different in those places. And they can go there, now that they've taken this value, they can leave. And yeah.
So industry already sees this, and I think it's more important than ever that we take the bull by the horns and steer things in the directions that we want to go. Okay, again, changing direction. So Conservation North is one of the organizations that was involved with the Power Forest project, and lately, over the past few years, they've brought a lot of attention to the issue of pellets in British Columbia because of all the forests up there that are being logged for pellets and shipped out by Drax. And so I'm going to ask Rachel, pellets and forests, what's the fuss?
Well, so the theory is there's a lot of waste that comes with forestry. That's a problem in itself. But when if you cut a tree with a chainsaw, you get a lot of sawdust. And so if you cut thousands of trees with a saw, then you get a really lot of sawdust. And we used to burn it in beehive burners in BC. And so that was bad. That's a bad idea. If you can think of something to do with that, that's a great plan. So let's not burn it. Let's put it in a dryer and make it into little pellets, and you can burn it in your stove. Super. What a brilliant idea. So you go from the brilliant idea, and then you let the free market take its path. And then it becomes less of a good idea because now we have multiple things going on. So if that diagram shows you the risks of when you get your feedstock for pellets from different sources. So if you get it from all the wood that goes into the landfill right here, then there's no risk. It's a great idea. We don't do that at all in BC. We don't extract that resource at all. If you get it from sawdust, then it's really probably an okay idea. But as you go up the chain in the forest, if you start to source it from real trees, then it's no longer waste. And so therefore the fundamental assumption of what you are doing is really not being met. And this is a pellet mill just outside Prince George. And I don't know, some of that looks like sawdust and some of that looks like trees to me. And I said at the beginning that we don't account for the carbon in forests correctly at the international scale. So the international scale says, yes, there's an emission of carbon when we log the forest, but we don't need to worry about it because the forest is going to grow back. So, and you know, fundamentally, in principle, the forest is a very different source of carbon than is fossil fuel, right? The fossil fuels, we dig them out of the ground and they increase the global carbon pool. They make more carbon on Earth active than was active a minute ago. That is why the fossil fuels have to stop being dug up. They must stay in the ground. Trees, in principle, cycle carbon, and that's okay. As long as you're not cutting trees that actually sequestered that carbon over thousands of years, which we have in British Columbia. So if you log primary forest, you are getting rid of all that carbon, and it will take many, many hundreds of years to cycle back to neutrality. The World Carbon Accounting System ignores that. They ignore that fine detail of time, since we only have minus 20 years to deal with climate change. We certainly don't have time going forward. But anyway, we need to deal with it now. We don't have 200 years to wait for neutrality. And so that is the problem with pellets. And on top of it, we have incentivization programs that basically push to suck up, to make more pellets. We have global incentivization that forces both Japan and the UK to do this, to make waste. And that's the problem in BC, because we have not, we don't put rules in place. We let the market make these decisions. That's a fantastic cartoon by my lovely partner who's sitting in the back.
So a few years ago, 2 documentaries were made, one by the BBC and one by the Fifth Estate, about how Drax is making pellets from wood taken from big trees around the Prince George area. So you can probably find those to get details on that. Okay, let's shift gears again. Let's talk about local forest issues in the Kootenays. What is happening here?
Yeah, I'm just going to add one thing to that last conversation, is that there is a sweet spot for pellets, right? There is a lot of waste associated with forestry. So if you had a forest management system that was a good one, which we don't, but if you did, let's imagine, then the waste that gets the tops of the branches, the sawdust from that, we should be bringing that into town, making pellets, heating our local buildings. The Selkirk colleges run on pellets that they get from the Princeton mill. Some of that is a little bit sketchy, dicey in terms of quite where it comes from, but in principle, it's a great thing to do. And when you burn wood for heat, you get 80% efficiency. When you burn wood for electricity, you get 20% efficiency. So it's just dumb to do what we're doing, and we should put things in place to use the waste that we create in BC for a local solution. We don't have to kill the whole thing. We just need to put rules in place to make sure it's done properly. So what's happening here in the Kootenays? Oh my goodness. Well, it's, you know, we could do this for hours. I told you about the biodiversity rules that were put in place in 1995. What came with that here in the Kootenays is the Kootenay Boundary Land Use Plan. It's a high-level plan that's supposed to direct what happens to landscapes in the Kootenays. Well, one of the key things in that, there were lots of key things in that when it was written, most of which were never implemented. There were biodiversity corridors to think about climate change. There were mature targets. There was minimal levels for how much, like we shouldn't get so many clear cuts out on there on the land base. All of those things were never implemented. But one of the things that stayed in that land use plan are old growth targets. And it says for each landscape unit, the areas that Joe was talking about, you have to keep a certain amount of old growth. And for the last decade and a half, me and other people have been raising the point that these old growth management areas that are out there actually don't have old growth in them. And we raised it with the district manager, I don't know, in 2017, 2016, 2017. I did an analysis to demonstrate this. They did their own analysis internal to the province and showed that only 20% of the area of old growth management areas are old growth. And there's old growth outside them that they can still log, but there's power lines and mid-cell and pretty much anything other than old growth in those old growth management areas. And they have created a loophole in the system to allow that to pass through the tenuous process of meeting the legal requirements. And we've been raising this for a long time. We're still raising it. It's still not been fixed. So what we have as a management system is, in itself, a risky management system. It puts great pressure on the ecosystem itself. That if you did all the rules well, it's a very risky place. We're only keeping a tiny fraction. Like Give Out Creek, the target for retention of old growth is 3%. Right, and the big numbers are 9% Like where we're keeping more, where we think the biodiversity is really important, we're keeping 9% of what would have been there. So the targets themselves are really low. And on top of it, here in the Kootenays, we stand out as exceptionally failing to implement these rules. So when you're complaining about a cut block, should you ever do that, understanding that the system in place that they say is there to protect old growth has not been implemented correctly. And this is an ongoing conversation, and the province knows very well about it. That old growth strategic review pointed out 2 places in the province that are failing to do this basic management, and this is one of them.
It's kind of convoluted and hard for average people to keep track of what's going on. Is there anything else in regards to old growth deferrals and the old growth management areas that we should know about?
Yeah, so some of you know that I was on the Old Ministers Technical Advisory Panel on old growth and identified provincially the 2.6 million hectares of old growth to be deferred, which was a thing that came through the old growth strategic review recommendations. And this area in the province, so contrary to all of the other things that I said, in this case, the nations relevant to this area all agreed that those deferral areas should be kept in the short term. So that is a good thing. They're in place here. They are not anything like a solution. They weren't intended to be a solution to the problem. They were intended to be a short-term interim stopgap to prevent the harvest, to prevent the talk and log that we were talking about earlier. Like they were supposed to be, let's identify using the data that we have, which is poor. Let's just be really clear. Those, in theory, best areas to be kept for now while planning is done. But the planning is not happening, and it's all not happening fast enough. So that is a temporary solution that it's unclear what will happen to it. There's no exit strategy. There might be a really quick exit strategy if everybody votes the wrong way in the coming weeks. Real quick exit. But there is no real firm plan about how that moves forward. In other parts of the province, those areas were not agreed to, and the province as a whole is under very different direction. There are certainly some nations that I work with that want to protect all the old growth, and the province says no. And so that is a problem, because we're supposed to be looking at the world through the new eyes of DRIPR, the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, but we don't do that particularly well when it's a conservation focus, but we love to do it when it's less of a conservation focus. And it's a very interesting dynamic that's at play. It's a great deal of, I shouldn't even say that. I won't say that, never mind. I won't say it.
Don't say it.
No.
Should we fill in the blanks? Okay, so how much of a say and how critical are First Nations when it comes to the old growth deferrals?
Well, in that case, for the old growth deferrals themselves, the province put nations on the spot and didn't warn them that it was coming, even though we, as the Minister's Technical Panel, had said we had been promised that we would get to work with nations along the way, and they never let us. It was a very interesting process. And they were always scared to let the cat out of the bag and actually have a conversation, because they're scared about that. They're scared about the implications of DRIPR in a big sense. And then at the last minute said, oh, well, here we are. We've got this crazy map for you. And by the way, you have 30 days to respond. Yeah. So the nation said, yeah, thank you. They said, yeah, go away. Mostly. Most of them didn't respond. And, it was extremely poor rollout of that situation, and put nations on the back foot. And I work a lot with the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and I see a lot of the extreme dilemmas that people are put into. The choices are real Hobson's choice in terms of, being being put in extremely dire economic situations and social situations and caring about stewardship, but there's no exit strategies for solving these problems in a real way. We're supposed to have conservation financing coming to the table, but it's a drop in the bucket. So nations are being, put on the spot and saying, well, you could take over as the company leaves and goes south, you can have the trashed TfL. How about that? And of course, they're being really put in a very difficult situation because they may or may not want to do that. But if they don't do it, somebody else will take over that tenure. And so, it's extremely difficult. People are being put in extremely difficult situations. It's not my job to speak on behalf of nations, but I can say that I hear a great deal of genuine angst about stewardship issues, real concern, and so there is but everyone's human, and they're absolutely put in extremely difficult situations, and so it is. It's really untenable until somebody comes to the table and offers a real exit ramp. We're going to end up with an increasing pressure in that situation. And there just has to be real conservation financing. If we want this forest, we need money to make that happen on a phenomenal scale. There's 300 million right now. That buys you a couple of TfLs. It does nothing from a real perspective.
Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes here. I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and I'll just let you roll. What government forest actions, projects, initiatives should people be aware of at this point in time? And then what should the future of forest management look like?
Right. So, I've been screaming for the last age, but I'm going to tell you some positive things. Nothing happens fast enough, drives you crazy. Yes. But, remember that without unduly thing that I said, the timber supply caps that were in place that prevented good management from happening, well, they have gone. They have been removed from the legislation in the last 5 years. It took forever, but they've done it. And they have these forest landscape planning exercises, pilots happening. So these are government-to-government processes. There's 5 of them. I work on one of them. There's 12 new ones in the works. One of them is going to be Kootenay Lake. They basically are going to work with the provincial government, with nations, to redo land use planning. It will take forever, a decade plus, to get there. And in that time, there's talk and log. So it's an extreme problem. There's a lack of provincial leadership on this, but it is a massive change. The potential is there in that process to do really good things. I know that good things are happening in a couple of places in the province around that, so it is a potential positive thing. There's a change in the Forest Act, and this is boring technicality, but it actually is phenomenally different. In the old days, the district manager had to in the old days, a district manager could make a change could deny a cutting permit. For the last 20 years, under the Liberals, that got taken away. A district manager did not have the right to turn down a cutting permit if there was a forest stewardship plan in place. Now with this new plan again, the decision maker can in fact turn down a cutting permit. So there is a possible way to stop something that's happening that doesn't meet objectives. And they must refuse a cutting permit under some circumstances. And so these things are coming together in a potentially effective strategy to actually manage the forest in a good way. I won't talk about the details, although the details are super interesting and I'm happy to tell people about them. Back in the old days, remember when we all used to look at forest development plans and you could see where they were going to log and you could go and find out where that was and did that overlap with values. Liberals took that away, and now there is a plan. There is now forest operation plans that are going to be available, that are available for people to see. So again, the opportunity for engagement has just come back onto the table, and this is a good thing because for 20 years you couldn't even find the information about what was happening. So that's good. Then there's the biodiversity and ecosystem health framework that falls out of that old growth strategic review. I want to do this. Can I do this? John! He's asleep. Sorry.
Not totally.
The Biodiversity and Ecosystem Health Framework is draft. Sorry, John. I just had to do that. I've always wanted to do that. Haven't you just wanted to do that? I'm always scared when I'm sleeping in somebody's talk that they're going to do that. There's a draft plan. In theory, the province is recommitted to implementing this plan to come up with an overarching law that would put ecosystems first. Imagine if that were true. It would be fun. It's the most exciting thing. I know it's terrible. It's the most exciting thing that's happened at work in my life for the last 30 years. So this is a huge thing. And if this came to pass, there would be a chief ecologist. There would be something that was actually exciting. So this is a real thing. And the minister wrote a statement that actually acknowledges that the biodiversity of the province is under threat and needs to be managed in a different way, and we need to do these things. So it drives me crazy that it's so slow and that the actual actions have not got there in the last terms. But there has been directional change, and I see directional change in a daily way in my work. So when you feel like it's really hopeless, it's might still be hopeless, but there's, and this is in parallel with a global shift, right? It's in parallel with the global shifts. The Montreal Coming Biodiversity Framework work, we've signed onto it federally. We suck federally. We've been really, really, really awful at doing these things. And it's appalling how we align as a country with industry over and over and over again. But Europe is watching, the specifics are there. People are really starting to focus on this thing. And the vision, so there is a vision that can work. And all of these things, in my mind, the potential is right there. Timber supply has dropped to levels that were not in place since the 1940s, 50s, right? So right there, the model for those monstrous companies is disappearing, and they are leaving, and that is good because we don't want them. We want to go back to local. We got rid of a pertinency where there was a mill in your town that employed people and made valuable products. We skipped all of that in the early 2000s, and we shifted to this large volume-based model. So the model is local, and local mills, and value, and ecosystem health. Those things can work together. And the thing that I can say more than anything, I agreed with many of the things that were said earlier, and we have to stop talking to ourselves, and we have to build the bridges and talk to those people and find those multi-way solutions, because there are many mayors in surprising towns in this province who want that change too, who are as pissed off with Canfor as we all are. The nations are often extremely upset by what has happened. The value has been taken, and now there's nothing left. So if you want a job in forestry in the future, it's sure as hell not with the current model. So the transition has to be about value. We have a value strategy in the province that they are trying to move forward, but it's really hard because there's some of those bureaucrats, and I agree that exactly where the problem is, who don't want to see the change. So I also agree with that. The more educated people are, and the more they can speak to this, and the more they can say, this is what we want to see, is we could, in fact, have a very different future that is based on all of those things. And we could be a leader. Here in BC for climate, we have to be honest about carbon and put ecosystem health first, and then everything else can fall out. And then you have to go and vote.
Rachel, I have to say I'm really excited that everything that you just said is in alignment with our project, the Power of Forest project. Rachel hasn't been directly involved with the Power of Forest project, so it's really heartening that someone with her experience and knowledge is reiterating the things that we are putting in our project. So, time for you guys. Questions for Rachel. We've only got this one mic, unfortunately, so you're going to have to come up here and take my seat if you want to ask Rachel a question. Come on up. So you can hand the microphone back and forth to each other.
I have two questions, Rachel. One is whether you feel like the work that you did on the tech panel had any effect and what that would have been. It's not easy, but I mean, you know, as quick as possible. And then the other question I'm interested in is because of all the fires, like, and that affects what happens in the forestry here. And so I'm interested in the whole, what they call salvage logging, which we call post-disturbance logging, and what that means. And also how my understanding is that that is driven to a large extent by the pellet industry, because then they can take every living stick and turn it into pellets. Okay?
Yeah. I mean, the old growth, the technical advisory panel work spurred, like, what happened there in that moment spurred change in a big way. Like, the whole conversation shifted back to old growth in a way that it hasn't been for 20 years. So although the actual implementation of it really sucked, it was really lousy, and it was not, it was not an accident, in my view. Nevertheless, it refocused attention on our globally rare primary forest ecosystems in this province, and so that is good. And trees that would have fallen didn't fall. I mean, every day is like, should I go to the meeting? Is it like to keep a tree standing up or not? Like an important tree. That's my thing. Things have changed, and trees that would have fallen have not fallen. And so, you just got to. That's all you can do, right? The whole fire thing is a big schmozzle. We should be scared of fire. But industry is using fire as something to scare us. And I went to the Kofi conference. If I had longer and a beer, I'd tell you the story because it was really funny. But I went to the Kofi conference, and they had extremely wealthy, high-powered media folk there, basically talking to 600 guys in suits about how they could use the fire narrative to make themselves heroes. So that is how the forest industry views that situation. We can save you by logging the forest. That is the rhetoric that is being used, and it's effectively landed in the Chief Forester's office. And it is a significant problem. There's a science understanding that the way we have logged massively exacerbates the potential for fire by creating even-aged, especially in the central interior where we killed every deciduous tree, which naturally there was a mosaic of different ages and forest types. Deciduous trees are full of water and they don't burn. But we kill them with glyphosate because we think that they compete with the conifers. And so that practice for 40 years has made that landscape extremely vulnerable to fire. But right now we have, the industry lobbies are going to our regional districts and telling them that they need to support forestry because they're going to save us from fire. So getting your head around that and pushing back, the regional district is deciding next week whether to sign on to a Resource Works thing or not. Right? Check it out. We can, again, like as part of that transition, we need to never clear cut again because it impacts the way climate change hits the ground. You clear cut the forest, climate change hits the ground instantly and heats up the soil and heats up the water. That is bad. It's going to happen anyway, but it's going to happen more slowly if you have a closed canopy. If we can reduce fire risk, take out some trees, and we have to change our model of how we use those trees in order to use what we would call a pre-commercial thin right now. But we actually have to figure out how to use those trees. Because right now we take the big trees and leave the scratty little trees, and that's completely the wrong way around. Right? So there is a way to do that and have it be positive. Salvage logging is a disaster the way we do it, because we don't plan it. We pay no stumpage on it, so they love to do it. And we don't stop them logging the live trees when they salvage log. So I am fighting right now in some place. Like I said, yeah, you can salvage log, but you can't take any green trees. And they freaked out. Ministry freaked out, and the company freaked out because they rely on the green trees. They want the green trees to go with it. This is how we manage the pine beetle. We let them salvage the pine beetle, but and at the beginning they salvaged the pine beetle. Then they went, oh, look at that nice looking spruce there. Oh, look. And there's a Forest Practices Board report on this exact thing. It massively exacerbated the midterm timber supply crunch that we are now in, that they didn't manage it properly. So we can't let markets decide on salvage logging or anything else. I have to stop because I can just keep.
Rachel, are you able to stay here till 3 p.m. or do you have to head out?
Sure.
Okay, so we've gone a little bit over, so we've got time for one more question for Rachel now, and since she's able to stay till 3, there'll be time for more questions later. Anybody else want to take the hot seat and ask Rachel a question right now? Okay.
Go ahead, take the other one.
Okay, Jacqueline?
Okay.
Hi, Rachel. Again, Jacqueline Steckler with the West Kootenai Watershed Collaborative. We're interested in water, not only the trees. And 70% of the people here along Kootenai Lake have pipes in creeks. We are dependent on this water. We're dependent on the forest canopy. We're dependent on the geomorphology of what we actually have. There is such a long history to this, Rachel, that I have to ask you, both Oregon and Washington State have been through the same thing that BC is facing now. Weyerhaeuser used to have a huge corporate center in Portland. Mm-hmm. They logged the hell out of the Coast Range, and now those watersheds are struggling. They left and went to Georgia, a non-union state where they can plant poplars and use a feather buncher like they were harvesting trees. In Finland, where they did that too. I lived in Finland for 5 years, by the way. So the reality here is, I wonder, historically speaking, is there ever a cross-fertilization between these Pacific Northwest regions who have experienced the same business plan over and over again, that there isn't some way forward that we can bugger that plan? Because someone's making a business case to the ministry that this is the way forward. Yeah. Someone in a C office is saying to the investors, oh yeah, BC, great place to invest to get that fiber. There has to be somewhere where all that information since the 70s comes together into an understanding of what that business case is and is not. Could you answer if that's been happening or not?
Yeah, I can't answer. I don't know, but I do know that the business model is disappeared. Basically, it's disappearing because we've just let them have free-for-all, and every time there's been an attempt to do something positive, the industry lobby fights back, and so the thing goes away. But that pushes you closer and closer to the wall every time. I don't know what the heck is wrong with humans, but we don't learn. Like over and over again. This time it's serious. In the big picture, how did the Romans die out? This time we really lost the plot, and it's a mystery. It's a mystery. We don't have to worry about this though, because Donald Trump's going to come and take the water. Right? Did you see that? I've always thought they're going to come and invade us for our water, and they are.
Oh,
Someday. But sorry, I'll take it. I take it all back because I'm trying to be positive. It's so we just go and vote.
All right, thank you. Great big hand for Rachel Holt. Thank you so much.